In this video, we're going to be doing a tier list for the best swords to use on Alhaitham. So yeah, let's begin. Alright, so as always, we're going to see what you're going to need on a sword for Alhaitham. Generally, he's going to be like a fairly normal DPS. So I would say generally speaking, the damage weapons are going to work on him fine. But obviously, you'd want to prioritize getting enough crit. So getting crit rate or crit damage from your weapon is going to be pretty good. Then after that, you'd want to get attack. That's also going to be very important since he's going to scale with attack too. Elemental mastery is also going to be pretty good on a weapon. He's gonna scale with elemental mastery, but the thing is you probably want to get it from your artifacts. You don't really need to get elemental mastery from your weapon. It's gonna be a great bonus, but it's not necessary on your weapon. But it's also not like fully bad. So if you want to get it from your weapon, elemental mastery is gonna be a very viable option too. And finally, energy recharge, you definitely don't want to really get it from your weapon. It doesn't really need as much too, so yeah, it's probably not the thing you'd want to go for on your weapon, but in some weapons it might be viable. We're gonna see in a little bit. Also, obviously, higher base attack weapons are going to be pretty good. So yeah, knowing that, let's start ranking the weapon. Alright, so first of all, starting off with the cool steel. It's just a 3-star weapon. It's going to give you a low base attack percent as a substat, and then the passive is just going to increase your damage against enemies that are affected by hydro and cryo. That's not really going to be that good on Alhaitham, obviously. It might be usable, but it's definitely not the weapon you'd want to go for. So yeah, I'd put that like C tier. Next up, we have the Harbinger of Dawn. It's a 3-star weapon too, so you're going to have a low base attack, but you're going to have crit damage as a substat, which is pretty good. And also when your HP is above 90%, it's going to increase your crit rate. Especially at refinements 5, that's going to be a very good weapon on Alhaitham. The only downside this weapon has is the very low base attack. Unfortunately, Alhaitham is going to need like a high base attack. It's just like your normal DPS. We've seen a lot of characters recently who doesn't need like a high base attack or anything like that, and this type of weapons is going to work on them pretty well. But for Alhaitham, this is going to be a huge downside. But with that being said though, if you use like attack buffs and stuff like that, you might manage the attack, and when you have enough attack, this weapon is definitely going to be a very good weapon because it's going to give you a lot of crit, which is pretty good. So yeah, I'm honestly not sure. I might put it at like higher B tier or lower A tier. It's either of those, but personally I'll put it at like lower A tier. It's still a very good weapon, but it has downsides. Obviously, you want to make sure you're always above 90% HP, so keep that in mind too. We've got the Traveler's Handy Sword. It's just defense stuff like that, so it's going D tier. We've got the Dark Iron, a low base attack, elemental mastery as a substat, and then when you have like a quicken or aggravate reaction, it's going to increase your attack, which is very good. It's generally a pretty decent weapon. As I said before, you're going to need elemental mastery too, but the thing is it has a pretty low base attack and it doesn't really make up for it that well. It's not like the Harbinger of Dawn with a low base attack, but it's going to give you a lot of crit. It still doesn't really make up for it, so I'd still put it at like C tier. It's definitely not the weapon you'd want to use on Alhaitham. Skyrider's Sword, a very low base attack and then energy recharge is a substat, and then it's going to increase your attack and movement speed. I wouldn't really say it's that good too. I'll put it at like C tier. Exact same thing with the Favonius, kind of a higher base attack but still pretty low. Energy recharge is a substat, and then it's just going to give you energy from the passive. Again, definitely not really the weapon you'd want to use on Alhaitham. I might even put that like D tier since it doesn't really do anything to help out your damage. It's probably going D tier, yeah. We've got the Flute, kind of an average base attack, and then the passive is just going to give you like some extra damage. I wouldn't really say it's bad, but it's also not really super good. There's nothing really special. It's just going to give you attack and some extra damage, which is not really that good. So it's probably like lower B tier or higher C tier. Probably I would put it like higher C tier. Sacrificial Sword is just energy recharge. Alhaitham doesn't really need the passive, so yeah, it's probably going D tier with the Favonius. We've got the Royal Longsword, average base attack and then attack as a substat, and then the passive is basically just like a useless passive. It's just going to increase your crit and then remove it every time you crit. So yeah, it's not bad too, just for the attack and stuff like that, but it's definitely not like super good. So I'll put it at like C tier. Pretty much the exact same thing with the Lion's Roar. It might be a little better than the Royal Longsword depending on your teams and stuff like that, but generally speaking, it's not like a super good weapon. So yeah, I'd probably put it like higher C tier or lower B tier, maybe higher C tier. For outside Rancor, it's just going to increase your physical damage, which is useless. It's going to give you a high base attack, and it's also going to increase your attack from the passive. I would probably put that like higher C tier too. If it had a better substat, maybe. Other than that, it's definitely not a super good weapon. We've got the Iron Sting, an average base attack and then Elemental Mastery as a substat, which is usable on Alhaitham. And then the passive is just going to increase your damage bonus. Every time you deal elemental damage, it's just going to increase your damage bonus, and you have 2 stacks. Alhaitham is always going to be dealing elemental damage, so obviously you can use it. It's actually a pretty decent weapon, you know, it's just Elemental Mastery, some damage bonus. It's pretty decent. Nothing really special, but I would say it's pretty decent, so I'll put it at like B tier. It's definitely a usable weapon on Alhaitham. Especially with the refinements, it might be even better. We've got the Blacklift, a very high base stack for a 4-star weapon, then crit damage as a substat, which is pretty good. The problem is with the passive, we're gonna have to beat an enemy to have the extra attack, which is not always available. So yeah, for that, I'll put it at like B tier. If the passive were active, it's probably gonna be like an A tier weapon, but generally speaking, for general case scenarios, it's gonna be a B tier weapon. We've got the Black Sword, an average base stack, and then crit rate as a substat, and then the passive is just gonna increase your auto attack's damage, and it's gonna regenerate your HP, which is not really that important. I would say generally it's a very good weapon on Alhaitham. It's just gonna give you damage bonus and then crit rate with a decent base attack. Especially if you have some refinements on it, it's definitely gonna be pretty good. So in my opinion, it's definitely like an A tier weapon. Maybe lower A tier because we're gonna see better weapons at A tier, but it's still a pretty decent weapon. It's better than B tier in my opinion. So yeah, it's going A tier. We've got the LA Flash, a super high base stack for a 4-star weapon, a small elemental mastery substat, and then the passive is just gonna increase your damage bonus, but the problem is when you take damage, it's just gonna disable this effect, which makes it a very bad passive. So yeah, I wouldn't really say it's super good just for the high base stack and stuff like that. I'll put it like C tier, but it's definitely not the weapon you'd want to use for Alhaitham. We've got Sword of Dissension, that's the PlayStation weapon, so it's going D tier. Faster in Desire is just gonna give you energy recharge, and then it's just gonna increase your elemental skills damage and stuff like that, which is not really that important on Alhaitham. So it's going D tier too. Amino Makagachi is just a low base stack for a 4-star weapon, an attack substat, and then the passive is basically just energy. So yeah, it's not really super good. I would put it as C tier too. Cinnabar Spindle is just defense, and the passive is not really made for Alhaitham at all, so it's going D tier. Kagutsura Ichin, an average base stack and an attack is a substat, and then the passive is also just going to increase your attack, and it's also going to give you some extra damage, but it's not really that much. It's very decent in my opinion. It's definitely not super good, but it's very usable. So I would put it at like lower B tier. We've got the Sapwood Blade. It's just going to give you a high base stack, energy recharge, and then elemental mastery from the passive. It's definitely not a good weapon for Alhaitham at all in my opinion. Maybe elemental mastery is good, but other than that, it's not really that good. So yeah, I'll put it at like lower C tier or maybe even D tier. Yeah, it's going D tier. We've got the Cyphos, an average base stack, and then elemental mastery is a substat, which as I said before is very usable, and then the passive is just going to give you energy recharge. He needs some energy recharge, but it's not really that important. So yeah, overall, it's not really a good weapon. It might be usable, but it's definitely not good. So I'll put that like C tier. We've got the Prized Ishin Blade. I've seen some people in some tier lists I did before saying you cannot get this sword. They said you can only like use it and then it disappears or something like that. I'm pretty sure you can get this sword. I mean, I have it. So yeah, I'm very positive you can get this sword. But yeah, either way, it sucks. It's just gonna decrease your damage and stuff like that. So yeah, it's probably going D tier. We've got the Tukabu Shigure. It's the new weapon. An average base stack and then elemental mastery is a substat. And the passive is that when opponents are affected by like the effects from this weapon, it's just gonna increase your damage. So it's basically just gonna give you damage bonus. So yeah, it's just damage bonus and elemental mastery. It's pretty much the same thing as the Iron Sting. I'll put that B tier. Now finally for the 5-star weapons, we have the Aquila Favonia, a super high base stack and then physical damage is substat, which is not usable on Alhaitham. The passive is basically just gonna give you attack and then some extra damage, which is not really like super good. So yeah, I would say it's going C tier. It's definitely not a very good weapon on Alhaitham. We've got the Skyward Blade, a high base stack and then energy recharge is substat, which again is not really good on Alhaitham. It's gonna give you a small crit rate increase from the passive, and then it's just gonna increase your movement speed and also your attack speed and some extra damage. Overall, it's definitely not a great weapon on Alhaitham. I'll put it at like lower B tier maybe. For a 5-star weapon, it's bad. We have the Freedom Sword, a high base stack and then elemental mastery as a substat, and then the passive is gonna give you damage bonus, which is very good, and it's also gonna give you auto attacks damage bonus, and it's also gonna increase your attack, and obviously it's gonna buff all of your party members too, which is super good. So yeah, it's definitely a very good weapon. I would put it at A tier. It's one of the best weapons for Alhaitham in my opinion, especially because of the buffs to your other teammates. When it's compared to other weapons on Alhaitham alone, it's not going to be like super good, but when you account for the overall like effects and benefits, it's going to be pretty good. So yeah, it's going A tier. We've got the Summit Shaper, high base attack and then also attack as a substat, and then the passive is basically just going to increase your attack and you have to be protected by a shield. It doesn't really offer much besides attack, and also you have to be protected by a shield, so I wouldn't really say it's a super good weapon, but it's going to be very usable, so I would put it at higher B tier, like super high B tier. We have the Jade Cutter, kind of a low base attack for a 5-star weapon, but it's still pretty high. Crit rate as a substat, which is pretty good, and then the passive is going to increase your HP and then provide an attack bonus based on your HP. So the whole weapon is just going to give you crit rate and attack, which basically is all you need for a character like Alhaitham. You get crit rate and then some attack bonus, a pretty decent base attack. So yeah, it's going to be one of the best weapons for Alhaitham. So yeah, it's going S tier. It's one of the best swords in the game. We've got the Mist-Splitter Reforged, a super high base attack and then crit damage as a substat. And then it's just going to give you elemental damage bonus from the passive, and it's also going to give you even more damage bonus if you're able to have the full stacks. I would say you're generally going to be able to have at least like 2 stacks. It might drop sometimes, but generally speaking, this is what you're looking for. Sometimes you might even get 3 stacks. So yeah, it's very usable on Alhaitham, and for that I would definitely put it at S tier. It's definitely a top weapon for Alhaitham too. We've got the Haran Gippaku Futsu, a high base attack and then crit rate as a substat, which is pretty good, and then it's also going to give you elemental damage bonus from the substat, and then you might get some normal attack damage bonus from the passive too. Now it depends on how much you're normal attacking with Alhaitham, so it depends on like the rotation stuff like that, but generally speaking it's still a pretty decent weapon. I will put it at S tier, maybe lower S tier, because as I said, it depends on how you're using Alhaitham, but it could be pretty good. Sometimes it might be even like top S tier. We've got the Key of Khashni Suit. It's just going to give you HP, which is not really usable on Alhaitham, and then it's just going to increase your elemental mastery. Definitely not super good. You definitely don't want to use it on Alhaitham. There are a lot more better weapons, so yeah, I put that as C tier. And finally we have his signature weapon. It's going to give you kind of a low base attack for a 5-star weapon, but it's still pretty decent, and then a huge crit damage substat, and then it's going to increase your crit rate by a little bit from the passive, and then it's going to increase your normal attacks and elemental skills damage from your elemental mastery. As I said, we're going to be building elemental mastery on Alhaitham, so it's going to be pretty good. Obviously it's his signature, so it's definitely going S tier. It's not by a big margin though. It's not like a very super good like signature where you're going to see like a huge difference, but it's definitely the best weapon to use on him. So yeah, it's definitely the top weapon at S tier. So yeah, this is the tier list, guys. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. If you want to say anything, leave it in the comments, and see y'all in the next video. Peace.